To many, history is often the most boring and tedious class they will go through in their schooling career, with many doing it either for the school requirements or just a good grade. With most people's experience of learning history being related to or school projects, the stigma of the subject as a whole of being boring is pretty common. However, just because school doesn't teach the interesting or funny parts of history doesn't mean that they don't exist. And today I'm going to give 3 examples of times when real life history was better than any novel could dream to be. Our first story comes from the Roman Empire. Known for their military might, wealth, and overall power, they had conquered such a vast amount of land it was unthinkable for them to fail to seize the island of Britain. Now, Britain actually had political and trade relations with the Roman Empire between 55 BC and 40 AD, but by the 40s, the island was turning into a complete and utter mess. Roman Emperor Caligula had just finished his invasion of the Rhineland and seemed to recognize the perfect opportunity for an invasion of the island of Britain. Now, since Britain is an island, you cannot simply just march your troops to the country for a battle and start fighting. You first have to use a navy to transport your troops across the water and then start fighting. Except for the one Roman who could walk on water. I wonder what happened to him. But back to the story. Now, historians question why Roman Caligula did what he did, but he started the war by placing his artillery and soldiers in formation directed towards Britain, which is pretty normal for a war. But there was an issue with his military tactics. His soldiers were placed on the opposite side of the English Channel from Britain, in Germany. This did not dissuade the emperor, as he ordered his soldiers to attack the ocean. After the soldiers had begun slashing the ocean with their swords for a while, the emperor declared the invasion a success, and the Romans victorious. But this isn't even the end of the story, as after declaring victory, he ordered his men to fill their helmets with seashells, calling them spoils of the ocean, and telling his men to go their way rich. To further commemorate his hard-fought victory, he ordered the construction of a lighthouse, which was actually used during the Roman invasion of Britain a few years later, and that one actually succeeded. The next story covers the remarkable life of Douglas Bader. Now, this average-sounding man is remarkable because he was basically Maverick from Top Gun, but on more steroids than Liver King. Born in 1910, Bader was an exceptional athlete, participating in many of his school sports and doing exceptionally well. In 1928, he enlisted in the RAF and began his training to become a pilot at the Royal Air Force College, Cornwall. Graduating in 1930, he was assigned to No. 23rd Squadron and lived his life as a wild card. However, tragedy struck in 1931, as when he was performing band aerial acrobatics, he crashed and was lucky to escape with his life. But he had to have both of his legs amputated. This would spell the end for most pilots, as your legs are essential for operating the rudder of the plane, and for Vader, it did mark the end. That was until 1939, when the world was thrust into World War II and he wanted to rejoin the RAF. During his first 2 attempts to rejoin, only ground jobs were offered to the amputee, but this didn't satisfy him. However, on request of Air Vice Marshal Hallahan, Bader was ordered to flight training for his abilities to be assessed. Bader then progressed through the ranks and on his first solo flight since his crash, flew his biplane upside down at just 600 feet of altitude. A similar stunt to what he did to lose his legs. During the war, Bader can only be described as a badass. He flew in both the Battle of France and Battle of Britain. Now, to become an ace, which is a highly sought-after achievement, you have to shoot down 5 enemy planes. Douglas Bader not only became an ace, but shot down an estimated 30 enemy planes, with 24 being confirmed by 1941, just 2 years after the start of the war, and also became one of the first wing leaders in the RAF. But on the 9th of August 1941, he was shot down. Now, how he was down is debated, but what matters is that he was able to get out of the plane midair and use his parachute to glide to the ground. He landed in German-occupied territory and became a prisoner of war. Now, his time in Germany is just as wild as the rest of his life. But some of the highlights to mention are how he managed to convince Colonel Adolf Galland of the Luftwaffe to let Bader sit in the cockpit of Galland's personal Bf-109. And Bader even asked to take it for a spin around the airfield, which was sadly declined by Galland. All of this was while being a prisoner of war. Bader also tried many times to escape, with one being straight out of a movie. As while in hospital, he tied his sheets together, threw them out the window, and then climbed down them to escape. He was then sent to Colditz Prison, where he attempted to escape even more. He eventually got out nearly 3 years later as the prison was liberated by US forces. Upon return to Britain, he led a 300-plane fly past over London and made a temporary wing commander. Now, Bader's stories are wild, and I lightly scratched the surface of his life in this video, but if you are interested, I would highly, highly recommend the book Reach for the Sky, as it better documents his life. Our next story comes from Napoleon, who is known for a few things. The first is being short, and the other is his military intelligence and success. However, this military leader obtained one of the most embarrassing defeats at the hands of rabbits. You know, the small fluffy things people keep as pets? Well, after signing the Treaty of Tilst in 1807, ending the War of the Fourth Coalition, he ordered his chief of staff to start collecting rabbits for a rabbit hunt in a form of celebration. Napoleon invited some of the most prominent men in the military to this party. Another thing Napoleon was known for was overcompensating. He sought to impress his general with thousands of rabbits for the hunt. But upon opening the cages, the little fluffy creatures were expected to run and flee for the men to hunt, but almost the opposite happened. The rabbits swarmed Napoleon and started climbing all over him while the other men present laughed. However, due to the amount of rabbits, Napoleon couldn't shake them off, even with his men trying to beat them off him with sticks. He only managed to get away after getting in his coach and driving away, but some accounts state rabbits actually jumped in the coach and others followed in pursuit. Now, the cause of this embarrassment is also quite funny. The chief of staff, tasked with collecting the rabbits, bought all tamed rabbits instead of wild rabbits. The tamed rabbits were accustomed to humans, so they had no reason to flee. They also expected Napoleon to feed them, so the reason they jumped on him was because they thought he was going to feed them. Now, this video has already taken too long to edit, but I do have one more small bonus story from the small country of Liechtenstein, which is the fourth smallest country in Europe and has managed to stay out of most major wars and conflict since its founding in 1719. However, they did send out their military to war once, and it was to Italy. In 1868, they sent a military force of 80 to help guard the Austrian border in Austria's war against Italy. Now, when they got to the border, they realized how there was nothing to do, so they spent most of their time lounging, drinking, and smoking. When the war ended, the men simply marched back home to Liechtenstein, meaning that these men had not fought a single battle and also now had a count of 81. Now, some mathematicians in the audience might realize that this is more than the 80 they brought with them. So where did the extra men come from? Well, debated between different accounts, it was either a defector of the Persian-Italian force, or just someone they nicknamed the Italian friend. I would just like to say thank you to everybody who made it this far into the video. This has taken a really long time to edit and was my first major video project. So comment down below